right, fantastic. Let's change it then. Let's look at this situation here. So what I'm going to do now is instead of adding 2 after I've applied my function, I'm going to add 2 to my input. So I'm going to add 2 to my input, then apply my function. In other words, I'm going to take my function applied to x plus 2. So you see the order of the plussing 2 is different. With this one, I'm adding 2 after I've applied my function. So I do f of x first, then I add 2. With this one, I add 2 to my input first, then I apply it through my function. So in this case, what I'm going to end up with is x plus 2, and then I square it. So I add 2 to my x, then I square it. Okay. So can you tell me then what 0 will be? So if I stick 0 into my function, what would I get out as my output? Good. If I stick 1 into here, what do I get out as my output? Good. If I stick 2 in here, what do I get out? And if I stick 3 in here? Sorry? Good, well done. And if I stick -1 in here? Yep, not 9. So just be careful here, because I notice that you see some kind of symmetry going on, you're trying to be lazy. That's fine, okay, it's good to see patterns, but just double check that one.
1.
Good. What about if I stick -2 in there? Good, and if I stick -3? Okay, so let's have a look here, because this is slightly different. It's not the same as just what we're doing here. Okay, notice that the kind of point of symmetry, the vertex, if you like, has changed. Okay, so let's plot this. So if I plot this, I'm going to get a graph that looks something a bit like this. Okay, so it's not a brilliant graph, but it does the job. Okay, so now my vertex is over here at -2, 0. Okay. So what has happened? What's happened to, well, let's look at the original graph. Let's look at f of x. What's happened to get from this graph to this graph? That's a terrible drawing. What's happened?
We shifted to the left.
Good. By how many units?
2.
2 units. Perfect. That's totally fine. So I'll put shift or a translation if you prefer. But if you like shift, that's fine with me. So it's a shift or a translation, okay, by 2 units still. Okay, so still the 2 units going on. But which direction is it? So you said left, okay. What I'm going to say there, by 2 units in the x direction, yeah. But I'm going to say in the negative x direction. But if you wanted to put shift 2 units to the left, that is totally fine as well, okay. Now, that's weird, isn't it? That's weird. Because, okay, you can see here, you can see when we did this one, this was a shift in the y direction. I should say positive y direction, just to be consistent. Even though it's implied. Okay, you saw with this one, when I had the function first, the f of x, then I added the 2, you basically saw that that was a shift in the y direction by 2 units. That made sense, right? Okay, so you took this graph, shift it upwards by 2. But look at this one. So in this one now, we basically got f of, then x plus 2. In other words, we apply the plus 2 before we do the function. Okay, we do the x plus 2 first, then we apply f to it, apply the function to it. Okay, and did you see that, okay, it happens in the x direction. That makes sense because we're changing the x, whereas with this one, we're changing the y. Okay, however, look at that. You've got plus 2. What does that imply? Should it be positive direction or negative direction?
It should be positive.
It should be positive, shouldn't it? Yeah, you see the plus there, like that made sense. It was plus, positive direction. That makes sense, it's the positive direction. You see plus there, you think, that should be positive as well. But it's not, it's in the negative direction. That's weird, isn't it? That's weird, okay? So that's the first thing that we need to note. So what I'm going to do actually is I'm going to create a little summary table over here to kind of keep track of exactly what we've done. So if we have some function, so these are the 2 shifts that we can have. This one was a shift in the positive y direction, and this one was a shift in the negative x direction. So it can happen either in the y direction or in the x direction. So I'll create a little table. I'll put a column for x and a column for y. So the first thing that we looked at was a shift, or a translation, whatever you want to call it. And we basically noted, so we did the y direction first. So in order to do this, if we start off with some function of x, so y equals some function of x, we basically noted that if we want to move the whole graph upwards by however many units, we just need to add that on after we've applied the function. Okay? So in other words, if we want to change it, we're going to take f of x and then add on whatever value we want. So in this case it was 2, but in general I could just say add on some constant. I'm just going to say a. And that's going to correspond to a translation or a shift upwards by that many units. Okay? Now the way which I'm going to write this is actually as a vector. Okay? So this is going to be a shift upwards by a unit. In other words, I'm not going to move any units across. That first number tells me how many are moving across by. The second number tells me how many are moved up and down by. In this case, I'm moving upwards by a units. Does that make sense? Yep. So in other words, the whole graph just basically gets picked up and just shifted upwards by a units. Okay? If I'm doing the x direction, so we've just seen that there, so I need to change the value of my x. So I need to add a to the value of my x. However, and this is where we need to be careful, it's still going to be a shift. Okay? We're not going to move any units up, so I'll just put that second number as 0. What's my first number going to be? It's not going to be a. It's not going to be x. So a is going to be the amount which we move by. So it's going to be something a, but it's not going to be positive a, is it? It's negative a. This was the weird one, wasn't it, when we did it down here? We saw that +2 and we're thinking, okay, shift in the x direction, sure. Think it should be positive 2 units, but it's not. It's negative 2 units. Okay, so it's the opposite of what you think it should be. Okay, so this is going to be negative a 0. Let me write that a little bit neater. Negative a 0. So in other words, you're basically just taking this graph and just pulling it backwards by a. Does that make sense? Yep. All right, good, fantastic. So can I ask you then, don't worry about copying all of this down, but can I ask you to make a copy of this table with me? So we'll start filling this table in.